Thank you to our audience again for tuning in. Like I just mentioned, we're going to give it a few more minutes, maybe like one or two, to let people stroll in. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Abby Ape. Again, I'm with the Brickell Homeowners Association, and I'm here joined today by Nora Dennis, Will Washburn, and Roberto Blanco. We can go down the line and now allow each of you all to introduce yourselves. So, Nora, since you're to my right, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Nora Dennis with Digitex Wireless, and we're here today to discuss some pretty important topics in terms of the updates of the BDA and requirements. And I've been with the company since its inception, and I'm really happy to be here. Thank you.
Will Washburn, CEO of Digitex Wireless. Thank you, Abby, for inviting us and to conduct this panel. We are about 6 years into this BDA project, and I got a lot to share today about developing code requirements and some other observations we've made and building over 100 units over the last 2.5, 3 years. So look forward to sharing that information.
And I am Roberto Blanche from the law firm of Siegfried Rivera. Thank you all so much for continuing to invite us to partake with the Brickell Homeowners Association and also with Nora and Will. It's a repeat for us. We've done this a few times before, but it continues to be an important service for those constituent members of the BHA because these are important requirements that are being imposed and have been imposed as it pertains to high-rise towers. They, on the one hand, aim and strive to provide good life safety objectives for first responders and for those people that are living, working, playing in these high-rise towers. But it also presents a costly, pricey, in some cases, obligation for the associations that, going back to one of the themes that we strive to advise our listeners on, which is, be prepared for this, be ready for this. Many years ago, we advised the membership of the deadlines for compliance with these requirements. Those deadlines have come and gone, and still some buildings may not be in compliance, but it's an ongoing requirement, as we will discuss momentarily. And so I think it continues to be relevant, notwithstanding the fact that the initial deadlines have passed already.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for the introductions. And like I mentioned, my name is Abby Ape. Thank you to our attendees for being here today. We are presenting live on YouTube as well, so you can later share it with your board members, property managers, or all those who are relevant. So thank you all for your time, for being here. And Will, I'm going to go ahead and let you take it away. I will be here on the back end, but thank you all again for joining us today.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Let me share my screen. There's a lot of things to discuss here. One of the notes that I've taken over the past 3 years is that this is a very dynamic thing, and a lot of the authorities having jurisdiction, including City of Miami, Miami-Dade County, Miami Beach, they're all coming up the slope of compliance. So when this was first introduced in 2016, I don't think they had a real idea of how to enforce these these code changes in 622. And so as time progresses, they become a little stricter in their compliance. And that's really what I want to talk about today. But before that, for some of the new participants, I'm going to share my screen here and just give a little refresher of what the BDA is and the complexities of this state legislation as well as local code enforcement. And I know some of you have seen this, so I'm going to be brief in discussing it. And there will be a Q&A after, or if you want to come in on your chat and ask questions, we'll address them later. But this all evolves from 633-202. It's Florida Fire Prevention Code, Section 18. And basically, the original dates for compliance of these BDAs in any building that was originally over 3 stories, it was required to refit or new construction with the BDA system. But the original dates for compliance were January 1, 2022. And when COVID set in, they pushed this statute back. Senator Hooper introduced an amendment, and they said by January 1, 2024, they wanted all these buildings fitted with a BDA system, an emergency responder communication system. And you had to, by January 1, 2024, you were supposed to have a grid test done on your property and become compliant January 1, 2025. Well, that has come and gone, as Robbie referenced. And they have given the various different properties that aren't in compliance a little leeway because it is such a massive project and there's thousands of buildings that have to be compliant. And I think that we're about between 6 and 10% compliant now. So there's still a lot of runway on this. And one of the topics of discussion are enforcement actions that are starting to take place by the various different authorities having jurisdiction. So we'll get into that in a minute. But just for everybody's edification, a bidirectional amplification system is an emergency communication system that distributes land mobile radio with inside the building. A lot of our buildings are densely built and with low E glass and high impact windows, and RF signals do not penetrate all of the building in a lot of cases. So the BDA system distributes antennas throughout and has a donor antenna on the roof that communicates back and forth to the macro system, or what we refer to as the municipality. And it is bidirectional. The signal comes in through an amplification system and is distributed through antennas that are placed throughout the building in a lot of your critical areas like elevator, hoistways, stairwells, fire pump rooms, fire command centers, and what have you. So the system operates on a bidirectional basis. It is not a peer-to-peer system. So if multiple firefighters were in a building, all of their transmissions actually go out through the donor antenna to the macro and then back to maybe somebody on another floor or fire command or somebody outside the building. So it's a seamless communication hub that allows our first responders to communicate inside these buildings. Um, and and this is what it looks like. This is some of the equipment that's installed in your head end. This is your little donor antenna that communicates with the city of Miami or Miami-Dade County or Miami Beach's communication system. And this is an antenna per se in your garage. And it takes different complexities. For instance, when we did Icon Brickle, you can see the head end. It was required multiple systems because there's multiple towers and it's what we call a fiber DAS. But it was just a massive undertaking. The building's 3.8 million square feet. We put in 14,000 feet of coax, 16,000 feet of JPLR coax cable, antennas, Yagis, hoistway coverage. And so these are very intensive infrastructure, and there's a lot of code surrounding how we can install this and what kind of fire ratings our pathways have, as well as what kind of signal strength is required throughout the building. So I know a lot of you folks are returning customers, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on the structure of the bidirectional amplifier. As my message today is, let's talk about what's changing. In the face of this, we've done a lot of these installations, but there's still quite a few left. But there's also a maintenance and monitoring requirement that we continue to be engaged in with our customers to make sure that these systems are performing to the stature that the city requires, as well as not interfering with their macro system. Because if one of these BDAs did interfere with the macro, it renders the system inoperable for any. And because this is life safety communications, we really need to pay special attention to interfering with the macro, and that's where a lot of the change is. So let's get right into some of the code revisions. Now, whether you had your property mitigated or not is a discussion of code compliance. But once you complete the process, there is a maintenance and monitoring requirement that we're going to discuss here today because it's getting stricter. But here's kind of a broad brushstroke of the code revisions that I think are worth mentioning. The Miami City, Miami-Dade County, and Miami Beach are starting to cite those who are not in compliance. Now, if you get cited, they're going to fine, and you're going to be required to go in front of a special magistrate to discuss why you're not in compliance yet and what you're doing to get there. They didn't do it last year. So they were giving folks leeway to get proposals from multiple different vendors, find the capital to fund the infrastructure, and actually institute the build. So they've been very flexible. That's changing. They're all now out banging on doors, finding out if you have a compliance system, testing in your lobbies and your elevators. City of Miami's not even announcing it. They're just coming out and they're going through the building independently to try to determine whether the building has a system, and if not, why, and furthermore, if you do, they're testing it. And this is an interesting subject. Brickell is a very, very dense corridor. We finished some projects back in 2019. And since we finished them, the building had 100% coverage and was in compliant for years. But because of all the construction that's taking place, that particular property had a building, a 60-story building built in front of it and actually blocking its visibility to the macro site that the antenna was pointing at, which changes the dynamics of that property. So what passed for 4 years in a row all of a sudden doesn't pass, and we have to do augmentations to it. So they're trying to get their arms around, not only projects that haven't been completed, but ones that have been completed and that the dynamics have changed. So that's an important, they're going to require recertifications on a lot of those.
Will, I think that's a great point to stress for the listeners, because a lot of them, especially when you're looking at buildings like in the Brickell area, they look at this and they're like, well, we were built, a handful of years ago. We must comply with all codes, we must comply with all laws, etc. But as you indicated, given the redevelopment, the dynamics that exist in the surrounding areas, a building that may have had a good radio frequency and bidirectional communication may have, or two-way communication, and complied with it 3, 4, 5 years ago, may today not comply, and it may
Correct.
merit a reassessment. And it is important to note for the listeners that municipalities, you've got the state statute that requires one thing, you've got the fire prevention code that can also elaborate on this, and individual municipalities and the counties can become even more restrictive and impose additional layers and requirements on these buildings. And so they can reassess your building, they can force reassessment. The statute does provide some parameters as to how frequently a municipality can force a reassessment on the building. But when we're dealing with life safety issues, listeners should know that there is no grandfathering. A building that complied at one point may be required to enhance their system or modify their system. And with advances in technologies and changes in radio systems that the first responders are using, they might change frequencies, and a building will have to comply at a certain point in time. So I think that the listeners should be aware of this, and it stresses the need to work with good providers such as your firm, Will, to make sure that they are staying compliant and informed
Yes.
as changes are introduced by the municipalities and the authorities having jurisdiction.
Absolutely. And it's a great point because it's happening right now. And if anybody's looked at all the cranes in the air in that Brickell corridor, the landscape is changing and it affects a building that's already built. It's it's highly probable that now with the new requirements for maintenance and monitoring, that on annual inspections, some of these buildings will fail that passed in prior years. So we're going to have to upgrade the system, add remotes or antennas to get them in compliance again. And they've got a new team over at fire department, and they're pretty sharp guys, and they're coming around to each building and testing again. So and we're going to talk about that too with the new maintenance and monitoring requirements. But to say it's a cogent point. Thanks for bringing that up. Um, and rebanding, Broward County did it. They built all these BDAs that were in the 700 megahertz range, and then they rebranded up to the 800. They did it again just recently. They went from Class B requirements for BDAs to Class A channelized. Now that's pretty technical, and I'm not going to get in the weeds on what that is, but you're right. Broward County has already had band changes. So this is a very dynamic process, and we're going to talk about that in the new maintenance and monitoring requirements, but we're partners with our folks that we have built these systems for because this is a dynamic market and changes take place, especially in this city where all the building is still robust. And it's changing the impact of also interference capabilities with one BDA to another, also with the macro. So a good point, very good point, Robin. Also, another, and you're right, they're not grandfathered. We have we had 8 properties that were in for permitting and plan check with Miami-Dade. And this is a perfect example, and we've got all the plans approved. We now in production, and we're building them and getting them inspected. And Miami-Dade came back and says, oh, you need a humidity sensor in the BDA's head-end room. with alarms mitigated to the fire life safety platform. And we said, well, this wasn't a requirement when we got our plans approved 8 months ago. And they said, well, it is now, and you're going to have to put them in. So these changes that they're making at the authority having jurisdiction level, you're not protected by what it was when you were permitted and built. You have to conform to these changes annually, and they give you a little leeway on it, but you're right. It's absolutely something that we have to monitor, and we have to continue to pick these anomalies up in our annual certifications and inspections and correct them. Another one, and this, and another change is that they're requiring these companies to have higher level of certifications for their installers, and this is as a result of there's a lot of operators that really aren't steeped in this niche, and they've put in systems that have interfered with the city's macro, and B, they just weren't compliant with what the legislature was intending to broadcast. In the local AHJ, their code enforcements, were a little haphazard for quite some time, but they're requiring now that all lead installers have FCC grow license, and that they have NICET level ones, which is a certification, and they have to be certified with the OEM. So they're cracking down on the installation teams of these as part of their, ascent in their compliance efforts. Another big one is Miami City and Miami-Dade are requiring campus-style fiber DAS solutions for multi-building properties. Now, we've always installed a fiber DAS. It's a much more complex system. It requires a fiber component in the installation, and it allows them to communicate, but it reduces the ability to interfere because there's one donor antenna for the entire campus, and a master, and a bunch of remotes. But this is becoming a real problem, especially in Miami-Dade County, where they're demanding these campus-wide solutions. And without giving you an example, let's say there's a property that has common podium and a garage underneath it and 5 buildings on it. Now, all 5 buildings have different associations. They have different bylaws. They, sometimes don't play in the sandbox well together, but they have to get together on a unified front and install a campus style solution. And this is the toughest part of our job, is getting everybody to agree. But this is more prevalent than it was in the past, where you could install standalone systems in each building. They're not allowing that anymore. So these more complex fiber DAS campus style solutions are being mandated by the HJ. And there's been a lot of pushback. Some of the properties have gotten legal opinions that say they don't have to comply. Well, my answer to that is try to get through permitting and plan check with a standalone. So it's you still have to be compliant, but this has had a great impact on these multi-building campuses, and there's a lot of them. So if you're affected by that, we've got a ton of intel we can share with you on the process. But I've had Captain Meziosos out on multiple occasions to speak in front of these associations and say, look, you're going to have to do it unless you can confirm that you won't interfere with my macro system. And if you do, I'm going to fine $100,000 a day for a system that's in interference. So that's a big one. And it's not a big one for you as the listener. It's a big one for us because we have to educate, get it contracted properly, and share, which is very difficult for some of these associations to do on a shared agreement. So that is a new development that they're really enforcing. But I think the biggest one is Miami City, Miami-Dade County, and Miami Beach have adopted a remote monitoring and management requirement. And I really want to spend some time on that because if you look at their code, there's 4 pages regarding that. So what we used to have to do was we would bring some alarm contacts from our BDA system to the fire life safety panel, and it would trigger a supervisory alarm. Let's say the donor antenna got hit by lightning and was malfunctioning, or the batteries went bad and the battery backup. It will trigger an alarm at the fire life safety panel, and then it's supervisionary only. Then our client would have to call us and saying, hey, we have an alarm. Can you come out and test and figure out what's going on and rectify it? Well, that is outdated technology now from their standpoint, and it's all changing. Come January, you'll be required to install, and I'm going to show you a little picture of this, a little box next to your BDA called a response link. They're referring to it in the code as a remote monitoring unit. This is the only one that's been approved so far by the authorities having jurisdiction, and we were the beta test site for these. So we installed them, one in Miami-Dade County, we installed one in the city, we installed one at the beach, and they went through a process. And I'll tell you why this is happening. So let's say you built your building, you signed up for a maintenance and monitoring agreement, but your company didn't really maintain and monitor it. If you look at our contracts, we do. We actually maintain and monitor. We roll trucks if there are alarms, but we also come out to your property and do an annual inspection and a grid test. And that grid test, it was kind of loosey-goosey where we submit it. So we send it to the jurisdiction. They don't keep a copy of it. So there really was no central database on the enforcement of this. And this is the main reason why this is changing in their code, because this little system will now monitor it real time. It allows remote access, and it also is responsible for the document repository. So when we build this system, we have to load our closeout package up on here. And it's for the AHJ to approve and see before they'll come out and certify you. We have to load our annual grid tests. So it's a repository for these grid tests that have to take place every year. And it's monitored real time, meaning if you had an alarm, I can access that BDA and try to solve it remotely. But more importantly, we got notified directly that there was an alarm. So this is a 24/7 network operations center that's monitoring this. And we're learning about an alarm before our property owners do, and given an opportunity to correct it. But it's even more than that. They're going to take it to the next level because there's been several instances in the city and the county where folks built these systems, turned them on, had too much power, and they interfered, and it took them days, if not weeks, to run around and find out who's creating the interference. And in the meantime, they can't use their radios because they're getting stepped on by some oscillation from a BDA system. So one thing that's going to transpire is the authority having jurisdiction, let's just call it the city of Miami here, is going to have access to this network. So if you look at, this is just a sample of some of our properties here in the Brickell corridor that we've set up already, being proactive. The authority have jurisdiction has access to this, okay, as well as we do, because we need to get access to do our maintenance and what have you. But the authority having jurisdiction could log into this platform and shut your BDA off if it thought that you were interfering with it, or they could shut them all off. And so that remote access is really important for the authority having jurisdiction. If they had interference, they'll log onto the system, shut all the BDAs off, and turn them back on one at a time till the interference appears. And it saves their network from being out of service for that amount of time, while they used to run around and to each building with an Enritsu and a Yagi trying to find the interference. So this is one of the big drivers of why they're making this mandatory, that if you build a system, you have to install this little item. And this is over here at Bristol Tower. This is one of our beta sites. So one of the new requirements is that when we build this, you, the building owner, has to bring us a network circuit, which is 100 meg network circuit. We originally rolled these out with wireless access, as you can see, but they weren't as consistent as possible. So they want these to be hardwired into the circuit. So it's a pretty innovative requirement that they're enforcing. And we like it. We think it's good because it gives us more control over all those buildings that we built, and we will get notice immediately if there is an alarm or if there is interference or oscillation. But more importantly, it's going to tell us, hey, this property is coming up for the annual inspection on June 16th. Your annual grid test is going to be due. Please conduct it and upload it to the document repository. So that's a big part of this because the city didn't have a document repository. So it's a benefit, but it's another cost. It's another cost that our customers are going to endure, but it makes all the sense in the world from a compliance standpoint, also from a remote monitoring standpoint. So that's one of the big things that are changing here near term, and it's going to go into effect January 1, 2027. So if you have a building built and you don't have a maintenance and monitoring agreement, you're going to have to get one, but you're also going to have to install this in your property. For our customers that are already on a maintenance and monitoring, we're going to forego the installation and the equipment charges, but we're going to increase the monitoring portion, which costs us $100 a month additional, plus $50 a month if you have multiple remotes in there. So we're already instituting this with all of our customers, and we are going to provide the equipment and provide the installation services free of charge for our customers. We charge a premium for our maintenance and monitoring, but we're doing the work. We're doing the annual grid test and we're doing all the things that are required. So a lot of buildings are out of compliance because they really haven't done those annual grid tests. And so this is the most significant change coming down the pipeline here. And we've got, several months for compliance, but it's an addition. And as Robert said earlier, this is not grandfathered. I can show you here. Everybody see that?
While you're showing that, Will, I also recognizing one of the things you mentioned earlier, which is that some of the AHJs are beginning to enforce compliance. And we've seen this before, right? I mean, back many years ago, many years ago, when we had the recertification requirements and buildings would not timely comply with them, they get a notice of violation. the building doesn't comply, then they get sent to the special master or to the unsafe structures board, depending on what the authority having jurisdiction has. And in the worst case scenario, in a lot of these types of issues, municipalities can, impose fines. In theory, if the building is considered to be unsafe for occupancy, God forbid, they could even shut the building down. It's not my experience that municipalities are in the business of shutting buildings down and kicking people out. But it is important for our listeners to know that in some unique set of circumstances, that is a possibility. And I have been seeing as of late more of a trend by the municipalities to start enforcing a lot of this, and to start getting buildings into that special master track where they're being forced to appear at hearings, provide progress reports, provide hearings to demonstrate to these authorities having jurisdiction that the associations are trending, are moving in a direction, in a path toward compliance. And unfortunately, while this compliance, absent this type of process, can be pricey in and of itself, when condo buildings find themselves in having to take this extra step, they inevitably have their lawyers go, and that means additional legal fees. A lot of times when you go to these hearings, it means having to pay for fees to the municipality or to the county for the cost of going through that service. So while those costs are not anywhere near what some buildings might have to pay in order to comply with the standards, it's frustrating for a lot of buildings because it now adds an additional layer of expense, an additional layer of compliance. And so it is incumbent, I think, and behooves a lot of buildings to really take this seriously. We've been doing this already for a few years. We've been preaching this this situation to buildings and to our constituents at the BHA, but it should be noted that the municipalities are starting to take this even more seriously, and it could snowball into even a more costly, even more serious process if they perceive that the trend is one of non-compliance by buildings.
No doubt, absolutely. And what's happening on that front, um, it's they all attend this conference up in Orlando, and they're all comparing notes. It used to be Broward was the toughest in the jurisdiction, and they started sharing their notes with everyone. So they're coming up the glide slope of compliance on this. But this right here, this remote monitoring, occupies 4 pages in their latest code compliance. And look at the inspection requirements. This has to take place annual, and they have to do a 5-year inspection. So not only is it coming up to compliance on getting it built, but maintaining the system. Look at all this required. And by the way, this is best practice. This is what we've been doing since the onset. We actually set the standard on this because our goal is to keep it from interfering with the macro and doing its job, which is seamless communication when a first responder has to come into the building for an emergency. So you're absolutely right. These are costly items, but it is becoming the marketplace in Florida is quickly becoming one of the tougher jurisdictions regarding enforcement on this. Where before, back in 2016, 17, 18, and 19, they were a little lackadaisical about it. And those were, those tough compliant markets were reserved for San Francisco, California, and Seattle, Washington. Miami is taking the lead now. So they're taking it pretty seriously. Um, yeah, another thing, while we're on this subject is I've had board directors of property and property owners say to me, Will, we don't have the budget. We'll do this when we get fined. Well, that day has come. So if you're one of those holdouts, certainly get engaged with the contractor immediately because it is going to result in fines and citations and special magistrate meetings. So it is upon us, and the fire department's taking lead here in the city of Miami, and this is one of their initiatives that we think is good for the industry because it's protection for the first responders and allowing their communication systems to be unfettered by the activity that the legislation required to build all these BDA systems. When you get a concentration of these, if they're not engineered perfectly, they can even interfere with each other. So this is all real time enforcement actions that are happening. And, we as a builder have to deal with this every day. For instance, in the city of Miami, we didn't used to have this equipment in a conditioned room. Now it has to be an air-conditioned room. We're putting mini splits to accommodate. Wasn't in the original bid, wasn't in the original permits, and so forth. So I think the thing that you stated, Robert, was there's no grandfathering here. This is a dynamic requirement, and we're going to have to pay attention to it and make sure you're compliant every year. Um, One of the other changes that's up to the authority having jurisdiction. So originally, the National Fire Protection and an International Fire Code had the threshold of passing at neg 95. And what that means is it's the relative strength of a signal, and it's measured in negative numbers. So neg 95 was the threshold. So if you were neg 95 or better, and you did a grid test and all your grids are green under that threshold, you pass and you don't have to mitigate it. If not, then you have to put antennas where it's not passing and mitigate those areas. Um, Neg 95 was the standard nationally. City of Miami, however, raised their threshold to 105, which is in the building owner's favor because their radios work all the way up to 104, 105. So they put their threshold at neg 105, not the national standard at neg 95. This benefits the property owner because you would have to mitigate less of the property because of that signal strength threshold being expanded to 105. Broward went to 102, but Miami-Dade and Miami Beach are still in the neg 95 threshold. So different standards apply to different jurisdictions. Just note that when the fire department comes out to test their radios or the radio shop comes out to test their radios in the jurisdiction, if they get in an elevator and it bonks, you have to mitigate that critical point. So it's really you have to build to the standard that's required in the jurisdiction, but at 105, still a potential for that radio to bonk and means it can't lock onto an antenna to get a transmission out. It usually happens in either a stairwell or an elevator. So we still build to the best practices in our business of neg 95. But those are some really important changes that have transpired in the last 2 years that really impact the cost of mitigating these properties as well as the form and function of executing a contract and delivering the 95%. Well, it's 98 or 99% coverage required in the critical areas and 95% in the common areas. So just note that the jurisdiction has the ability to augment these, and Miami City did, but Miami-Dade and Miami Beach kept the same national standard. One of the other things I want to talk about, and this is why some of our property owners have not been able to build these systems, is they don't have the budget for it or don't have the capability. You know, some of these buildings are, not, they have a lot of their homeowners are on fixed incomes and they don't have the ability to, for these big assessments, and they're getting hit again with several assessments with SIRS and restoration and concrete restoration programs and higher insurance costs and everything else. One of the things that we introduced, I think it was back in 2022, was instead of you having to pay for it all up front, we built an OpEx model. Well, we will come into your property and build the system. We'll own and operate it. For that, we would ask for a subscription fee for the 10 years that we own and operate it, 120 months. So you could put this in your OpEx budget and make it a little more palatable as opposed to coming up with $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 to mitigate one of these properties, some cases $1 million up front. And it's been pretty successful. We're in the process. We've done 14 BDA as a service where we pay to build the system and we own it and operate it and depreciate it over 10 years in return for a monthly payment. And what happens at the end of that lease is we sell it back to the building for $1 and continue to maintain and monitor it. So this shifts it from the capital expenditure budgets to the monthly OpEx budgets, and it's a little more palatable. For those properties that have held out and haven't built this system yet, you may want to talk to one of our representatives about the potential for this, because it's a way to get in compliance and spread out the payments over 120 months. And lastly, I want to circle back around about this fiber DAS concept, because a lot of you folks are getting, and this is mostly in Miami-Dade County, but you're getting pushback on building your own standalone system. And I just kind of want to spend a few minutes about what that structure looks like and how it's different and how is required. You're required to be compliant by putting in a campus-wide solution. So a standalone has its own donor antenna on the roof. It comes down into the BDA and it distributes through the distributed antenna network throughout your property with antennas in your hoistways, antennas in your stairwells, antennas in your common areas, and it's bidirectional. So if a firefighter comes in, he transmits this antenna, picks it up, brings it back out to the donor. Now, you can see that this donor antenna is not big in form and factor, but it is the most important part of this because it's where the signal comes in and goes back out. If it points across a building and it hears one of these distribution antennas, it can go into a circular loop and create interference. Now, let's add to the fact that you may be a two or a three building concentric building that's built on a common podium, and you have three different associations, and these associations, are independent and want to put their own system in. If I put three standalone systems in those properties, the opportunity for interference is a lot higher because now I have three donor antennas. Whereas a fiber DAS solution has one donor antenna on the roof. In the case of Icon Brickle, it's on building one. And then there's a master BDA that controls everything. And then each building gets its own remote unit. Okay. And then each building builds out its own passive distribution network. Um, and so why is this better for reducing the potential for interference is because I have one donor antenna. And I have, this is all on one system. So I'm not going to interfere with my own distribution antennas that may be in a garage or hear that. So isolation of this donor antenna, which is a paramount for communication, is reducing the capability for interference in the building itself with its own system, as well as the macro system from the municipality. And this is how it looks. So each building would have its own passive network. Each building would have its own remote. And it all communicates to the master and goes out through one donor antenna.
Will, this is, it continues to impress me how there have been updates and modifications, and this, you've stressed upon this from the beginning of the presentation, which is how dynamic of a process this is. I know we're getting to the tail end of our time here, and I wanted to see if we can give some takeaway messages to those participants that are listening to us now, as well as those who are going to watch the recast of this presentation. What for the biggest issue, I think that both you and I have stressed, not only in today's presentation, but also in prior presentations we've done on this topic, is what an unfortunate set of circumstances as far as timing is concerned for a lot of high rises within Dade County, Broward areas, the more densely populated areas, but also throughout the state, which is, the structural integrity reserve studies that have to be complied with by associations, the milestone inspections. We talked about this as well, being another one of the conditions, and also some legislative issues that we now are having to deal with as it relates to the financing for some of the projects like the milestone or complying with the structural integrity reserve studies. And hopefully in this legislative session, they can fix that. But I like that you mentioned earlier the creative ways that associations can have at their disposal to capitalize this project with your entity. I also want the listeners to know that there are also conventional lending options out there as well that many lenders can provide as an option to associations in order to fund these capital projects that have to be taken. I think the biggest issue that we've discussed today is the fact that this concept has a life of its own, and because of new lessons learned, because of the continued state of development in our urban areas where we live and work and play, Broward and Dade County, booming from a development perspective and a high-rise construction perspective, which is not going to slow seemingly anytime soon. And this continued movement toward density does have a very major impact on the need to continue to perform assessments of the frequencies and of the systems that are installed in the buildings, and also the ongoing innovative developments that municipalities and authorities having jurisdiction seemingly continue to implement, which, for better or worse, is just something we've got to comply with and live with. I think it's important to stress to the listeners that, partnering with a vendor that is in touch with the changes in the requirements that municipalities are putting out, the local first responders are putting out, and also what the law is putting out, I think is probably the biggest takeaway here. And staying in touch with your association council as well, to make sure that any changes in the statutes, as well as the municipal ordinances and codes, are not being ignored by the buildings and the high rises in the area. I don't know if there are any questions. I'm not seeing any in the chat, and I'm not seeing any in the Q&A. So I don't know, Will, if you have any additional closing thoughts, seeing that I think we've got maybe a couple minutes left in our window here.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right about that. Some of the ideas that the municipalities have and want to enforce are bad ideas, and some of them are good. They've done a pretty good job of ciphering out the bad ideas and just going with what protects their network. They are the defenders of their network, and they can't do their job unless their radios are working seamlessly. So it's great for us to be part of an initiative that assists with that, because these folks, when we need to consider their safety when they rush into your building under extreme circumstances, and need to have the communication. So we're partners. We're partners with the authority having jurisdiction. We're partners with our customers and their buildings, because we maintain and monitor these. And this partnership is built on trust and doing the right thing for everybody involved in the protection of the life safety of all those who serve us. And we're in a sensitive environment with hurricanes and all kinds of other challenges and so forth. But this jurisdiction is great to work with, as long as you're doing the right thing. So if we can help in any way, we're here to serve you. And thank you, Robbie. From a legal standpoint, you actually hit on all the high points of this. And we really appreciate your assistance on this.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, Abby. Thank you, Nora.
Thank you all for your time. We appreciate you all. We'll be sharing this again via email and on YouTube. Thank you all for your time this afternoon. If you have any questions, or if you want to connect with our panels, with our panelists, feel free to shoot us an email. We'll be happy to further connect you. Thank you for your time this afternoon.